The Doctor. Doctor. Fun. Hello and welcome back to the Doctor Who Marathon. I'm your host McEdam, and today we're going to be talking about the 2009 Autumn Special, The Water of Mars. Written by Russell T Davies and Phil Ford, and is directed by Graham Harper, making his last story for the series, as far as we know for the moment. He might direct the Jodie Whittaker episode. Let's pray to God that happens, because that would be really cool. But anyway, back to this story. This story, oh my word, this story. I don't know if this video can't make any video that will give this story justice. Let's be honest, people. It is considered by many as one of the best stories in the revived series. Easily one of the best stories of the 10th Doctor era. This story was originally had many scripts, with its first draft being completely different. Originally, Phil Ford and Russell T Davies came up with a script where an alien princess comes down to Earth and would end in a scene in which the Doctor gets chased around in Buckingham's Palace's hallways. And we somehow got this. This was also, at one point, a Christmas special. But after the announcement that David Tennant would be leaving, it was decided that they would push for an autumn special because they really wanted to get this script done. They wanted this script out there. And so the Christmas special and the New Year's special, which became a two-parter, would be slated for David Tennant's final story, The End of Time. Now, this story is also retroactively a huge segment to the canon of Doctor Who, as this story is the installant. This story is the gas to the massive 2020 and 2021 multimedia event, the Time Lord Victorious. As this story basically sees the Doctor become a much more angry, a much more darker, a much more egotistical character who feels like nothing is above him, essentially. And when this story came out, I remember thinking, why didn't this become a massive deal? Because in the very next story, there was a gap between this and that story, but it was clear as day that the events of this story weren't going to really impact the events of that story. So it felt like there's this massive gap in continuity. But luckily, we have now filled that with the Time Lord Victorious multimedia event, which is really cool that any franchise got to have an event like that. It basically establishes that the TV, the comics, the books, the audio dramas, the small little games that you can play, they're all canon. With Doctor Who, everything, nothing can be excluded from the ranks of canon. And that basically proves it. But I'm getting off topic now. We're here to talk about The Waters of Mars. As I've stated, it's a very popular story. Everybody seems to like it. It's considered by many as one of the best stories ever made in the series. And yeah. Before I begin, this is the official Big Finish. This is the official BBC cover, which is really nice. Sadly, I hadn't had the time to print out a Region 2 DVD cover for this, as I normally do. But I do plan on getting one. I'll probably use one by Christopher Doctor Who DVD covers. If you're curious, you can find them online and you can see what I'm going to use for my shelves. But anyway, I'm getting off topic anyway. So, the story starts off, in my opinion, pretty weak, as we get introduced to a handful of characters as something is they just seem to be like just talking, and you kind of get the feeling that like these characters are joking around, and that you know nothing's really going on for sakes. And the Doctor steps out of his TARDIS and he's looking around the surface of the Mars as he's trying to look for just anything interesting to do because he's just arrived there. And the cliffhanger for the pre-credit sequence is the Doctor being held at gunpoint by a silly robot-looking creature. And honestly, for one of the best stories ever made, that is a very weak opening. When the Doctor turns around and he sees this silly robot, David Tennant's face portrays it so seriously, but the events, the idea of the silly robot with the gun, really, and the fact that the robot really just kind of comes out of nowhere, really gives this episode a very cheap-looking feel. Luckily, however, that's the only real criticism I can have with this story, as the Doctor gets introduced to the crew of the Bowie Base 1, the first ever humans to land on Mars. They're basically trying to repopulate Mars with humans after Earth has been sucked in with pollution and the oil running out and stuff like that. Now, it's important to note that this story is set in the year 1920, what the hell am I on about? 2059, which, for those of you who might be keeping record on the canonicity of Doctor Who, might remember that year. It is the year that the future Rani appears in the story of the Sarah Jane Adventures, The Mad Woman in the Attic. Why are there two stories with the exact same year and there's no connection between any of them? I don't know, but it's just a nice little something I'd noticed along the way. Sorry, my throat is killing me at the moment, but I'm going to just push through this. And what I really like about this is that for most of the characters, if we're going to be honest, they're a bit one note, they're one-dimensional, but the story knows what it wants to focus on. It wants to focus on the relationship between the Doctor and the captain of the Bowie Base 1. As the Doctor, when he realises he's on Bowie Base 1, realises he's at a historical event in history. So this story is technically a historical, only that the historical event in this story is taking place in the future from our point of view. A fictional historical event. So that's pretty interesting. And essentially we learn that the Doctor, what's really great is that the Doctor's given this like speech where he basically names all of the characters and he knows their futures and stuff. But we get, as an audience, we get like these cut-ins where it shows like articles, like on Wikipedia or something, of all the characters who were on Bowie Base 1, the first people to ever be on Mars. But all of the dates for their deaths are at the exact same time, 2059. Specifically, November, I believe it's the 27th, 2059, which turns out as well to be today. And the Doctor is kind of like, right, I've got to go, I've got to leave. I cannot mess up with time. But honestly, it was so great to meet you, and he holds up all of their hands and stuff. But then ponders, there should be two more people at the base. Where are they? As at this, in their forest, they have a forest under this massive dome, essentially a plantasia. One of the characters has been infected by something where he is constantly leaking water. He seems to be creating water and his skin has become all crackled and his eyes have become this crystallizing white colour, and seems to can be able to pass on this infection onto other people who touch the water that this character has affected, essentially. And when we see this attacks this one of the women crew members, and so the affection basically starts taking on to everybody, and that's essentially the premise of the story. It is down to the beat a base under siege story, a bus story. For those of you not in the know, a base under siege story is a Doctor Who status quo, as say, a type of story that Doctor Who does, where the Doctor and his TARDIS crew, but in this case he has none, lands in a base with a handful of characters, quite literally in this sense, and is attacked by creatures all around them as basically time is ticking, as it's just a matter of survival for the most part. And when it comes to base under siege stories, this story is probably the most base under siege. This feels like it could easily been taking place in the second Doctor era, but with one exception, one which kind of is unique to the revival series, and that is the whole put 6 points in time thing, where the Doctor basically feels like, well, he knows he cannot interfere with this event because, well, we later learn the explanation. But before we talk about like anything else, can we just talk about how great Graham Harper's directing is in this story, especially in the later half of the episode? My God, this story looks gorgeous. It's so crystal clear, and it's so clear that Graham Harper is so comfortable with the new HD cameras which were introduced in the story Planet of the Dead, this being the second story to be filmed in true HD digitally, with Spearheads from Space being filmed on film so it could be restored in HD. But now I'm getting off topic again. But yeah, Graham Harper really knows how to get the best performance out of David Tennant, which again gets out which shows more at the later end of the episode, and just the way he shoots the Bowie base. Sorry, the name of the base is a reference to David Bowie. The Bowie Base 1. From a very poor director, this story could look terrible. We have essentially three main settings. You have the main center of the base, where it's like this clear white room where you've got like this technology and stuff. Very Star Wars-y looking. You have this massive tunnel which the characters go through for a lot of the running scenes, and you also have this forestry. This it doesn't take much of the plot, but there's this one part of the dome is like this massive forest inside a building, and they've got basically three limited settings, with one being used repeatedly to get back and forth to situations. And in a poor director's hands, this story could have easily looked terrible, and especially with the very limited makeup of just a crackling of the mouth and the water coming out, which, can I just say, is such a creepy looking imagery. The fact that these characters are just constantly leaking up water, it kind of makes me feel kind of not claustrophobic, but I have makes me think a lot with water just constantly running. Like, do you know when you see like a tiny little waterfall and you just see the water constantly going, and you're always thinking, when is it going to end? When will the water run out? And it never does. As if somebody could weaponize that would be like one of the most dangerous weapons in the world. That is essentially what this story does, and it is done gorgeously. But let's talk about the Doctor and the Captain. Abigail? No, it's not Abigail. Brooke. Amberlynn Brooke. I think it's Amberlynn Brooke. Yeah, Amberlynn Brooke. Played by the amazing Scottish actress Lindsay Duncan, who considers herself a companion. So I'm considering her a companion, and by that, she is the oldest. She is the oldest character, oldest actress to be a companion, and when the story was released, the oldest person ever to be playing a companion. And I don't know if I would consider her a companion. Her role is very direct into the narrative, to the point where, despite the characters having this massive relationship, and there is this really great way you got this character who so senses of duty. She is so authorial in her direction. She is a leader. She can take action. She knows what needs to be done. If she has to sacrifice the entire pace to do it, she will. Only she is not previewed to the events that are come forth. But the Doctor, who at this point is a bit more looser on the rules, not that he will disobey a rule at the moment, but he will try and bend the rules as much as possible, especially learning from Donna from the stories like Fires of Pompeii, which gets a mention in this story, where he won't interfere with the timeline, but he will save someone if he can. Very small, unimportant people to the timeline. And so he's coming into this story knowing full well what's about to happen, and he knows that he cannot interfere, and essentially he knows that this is a fixed point, this cannot be changed. But however, the Doctor is slowly starting, basically he's very curious about why basically what happens in the future is that the Bowie Base 1 activates activates something 5, which is to set off a nuclear bomb in the middle of the base, so that any infection, any something really bad, like an enemy threat, doesn't get their hands on the base. It's something that's like the last resort, and that was activated. Nobody knows why, but it was activated in 2059 of November 27th. And the Doctor's very curious about this, and he tries to convince himself. There's a lot of scenes where he is like, I'm sorry, I cannot get involved in this. I've got to leave you. And there's a lot of times where he does get the chance to survive. In fact, Amelia, I'm just going to call her Brooke. Brooke, she basically lets the Doctor out at one point. She's like, right, Doctor, you can go. And the Doctor tries to convince her, like, right, I've got to go. You can handle this now. No! And he runs towards her to try and help her and find out about the water and all that, and realises what's going on as all the crew members start panicking, and one by one they get picked off. Most of the casts are comprised of red shirts. Red shirts, for those of you who don't know, is a fictional sci-fi term where you have a bunch of characters basically introduced to be killed later on in the story. But these are some pretty interesting red shirts, pretty fun red shirts to hang around, and the imagery of them, mouth being crackled and the water constantly pouring, is just this terrifying event. And by the end of the story, Abigail, I keep calling her Abigail, Brooke, she basically tells the Doctor to basically go. We will set off, because there's this one point where they think the water's infected, so they can't leave, but they go investigating, and the Doctor explains about the history and how he basically is talking to her, but he's really talking to himself, where he's like, I cannot interfere, because maybe, just possibility, maybe there's some moments in event in history where things cannot change, that something happens today, this moment in time is very important and it cannot be changed, and this will be a very important step in the future. And he asks to think and imagine something. What if something happens here which will inspire your grandchild? Your grandchild be the first one to not only leave the solar system, but to travel to another star. And that will be the first ever human interaction with deep space. Open the Earth to the Galactic Council, in a sense. And it's all inspired by the events that happen in this story. And the Doctor knows it's going to happen, and the Doctor explains how he cannot change it, and why this moment, why their deaths mean so much. Of course, he doesn't tell them that they are going to die. And I think Brooke understands that he knows about the future, and she, very authoritative and kind of sees like through the Doctor, realizes that he's telling the truth. He is a time traveler, or at least she suspects him of being someone from the future, and that these events are important to the timeline. When they learn about how the infection got passed, with one of the characters, the first character to be infected, basically revealing that one of the filters was broken, so all of the unfiltered water came through and infected the crew, which is what happened to them when they got this water, with this reference to actually the Ice Warriors, where the Doctor explains that the Ice Warriors must have known what happened here, and they froze the water here to stop the infection as much as possible. So, yeah, it's nice that the Ice Warriors finally got a reference in the revived series, but it would take us a while before we actually get to see them. But oh well. And so Brooke basically realizes that if the water was infected today, it means that everybody else is clear, and so they get ready to get their ships ready. They start running, they start getting packed ready. Brooke basically tells the Doctor to go to your own ship. We will pack up for hours. Just go, and we will sort everything out. And there's this fantastic moment where you see the characters basically getting ready, and they're making some like errors. They can hear there's this beeping noise, basically indicating that something is wrong. Only for basically the Doctor realizes that this is going to be the event that will trigger the catastrophe which is about to occur. And now he knows the curiosity is gone. He now knows what happens to the base. And so with a broken heart, he leaves, as just everything just goes absolutely worse for the Bowie Base 1, as one of the crew members gets gets flooded with water and becomes a creature. The captain who is going to run the spaceship back to Earth gets infected. His hand gets touched by one of the waters. The creatures are known as the Flood, for any of you interested. And so he basically acts as a self-destruct, leaving Bowie Base no way of escape. And the Doctor can hear on intercom of all the characters just screaming and shouting. There's at one point where, just before he leaves, Brooke basically blocks the door and asks the Doctor what is going to happen. He knows about the future. He knows what's going to happen. Tell me what is going to happen. As the Doctor explains the event of the future, that they all die so that her granddaughter can try go into the stars. As the Doctor explains, it's almost as if she's trying to reunite with her grandmother. These events inspire her grandmother and her grandchild, and she is kind of like distorted by this. This is horrible, like, this is my crew member, how can they die? And so because she knows what needs to be done, she activates the fifth security lock thing, which is to set off the nuke. And we get this time limit, and basically the water, the flood basically are attacking the base in all directions. They are in the ultimate situation of a base under siege story. Basically, the entire room that they're in is closing in on them. There's water everywhere, there's fire, there's a massive explosion outside, and the Doctor is at this point in time leaving. But he thinks to himself, he remembers all those words, all those times that his companions, his friends, his loved ones remind him that he needs to be the best person. He needs to save people regardless. As you can hear Donna's voice saying, like, just save one person. And also he realizes that he is the last of the Time Lords. He'll let this event go down because, as he remembers with the fires of Pompeii, that him being interacted with this story might be the catalyst of him achieving the explosion. It might have been him that triggers the events which will kill, like in the fires of Pompeii. From his point of view, he doesn't have a choice. It's like there's no way he can win. But if he leaves, he can. It's at least like he didn't be the one to pull the trigger. He's not the catalyst. He doesn't have to make that horrible decision. It's time. Time would do that for him. But he's thinking to himself, he realizes that he is the last Time Lord. There's no one to govern the rules. There is no one to keep the straight line of the timeline in check. It's just him. And so with that, he decides to head back. He decides to head back and save the rest of Bowie Base 1. It's here where the Time Lord Victorious is born, as he is just, from his point of view, I love this scene because it's played up like there's this epic like music and the scene kind of plays that this Doctor has become this dark ulterior where the characters are looking at him as if he has gone completely mad, and David Tennant takes complete control of the situation for the majority of the scene, as if he's playing basically his Doctor on a field day, and he's smiling, he's cheerful, he basically is like, right, I am going to win, nothing is going to stop me. But then there are bits where he bursts out in anger, where he realizes that he is not the survivor of the Time War. He's the winner, he's the victorious, and that the laws of time are his to obey. And when he says that, when he says the laws of time are mine and they will obey me, don't you get some serious master vibes? It's essentially the Doctor coming the closest we've seen in his current televised state to becoming the Valeyard. In my head, this is like one of the epicenters, one of the moments where the Doctor could have become the Valeyard, but he doesn't. He becomes the Time Lord Victorious, which is essentially a very similar premise. As he saves the crew, he gets the robot to basically travel really fast to go to the TARDIS and materialize the TARDIS in Bowie Base 1, where he saves the 3 crew members left and puts them back onto Earth as the base explodes. And the 2 other crew members are freaked out by this, and they run off, and we never see them again. And the Doctor has this interaction with Brooke, which basically is the catalyst for one of the greatest ideas in the 10th Doctor, the Time Lord Victorious. The Doctor basically explains his thought process that he basically won the Time War. As to quote the 10th Doctor, "For a long time, I thought I was just a survivor, but I'm not. I'm the winner. That's who I am, the Time Lord Victorious." And when Brooke is like, that is wrong, we were supposed to die so that my grandchild would become this important person in the future, you cannot change time, the Doctor just goes, tough. I'm sick of losing people. This is great. You should be happy. You lived, you survived. You can now inspire her in person. It doesn't have to be your death that's the start of this. But Brooke knows that the Doctor is gone too far. If the Doctor is allowed to get out of this event scot-free, he could basically not come back from this. He could become this malevolent, dark entity as she heads into a house with a gun, and we hear a shot fired. Presumably, she killed herself. And the Doctor basically thinks back to all those articles, and the times have been changed where our characters, at least 3 of them, didn't die on Mars. They died on Earth, with Brooke committing suicide, and I don't know what happened to the other 2. And the Doctor realises he has gone too far as he sees a vision of Ood Sigma from Planet of the Ood, and he realises it's like, is this time? Is this my death? And he gets into the TARDIS with a broken heart as he just stands there quietly until he announces no and sets off into the TARDIS. This would technically direct straight into the end of time. However, it's really weird how we go from this Doctor that has this really dark and inspired to basically be able to try and stop death whenever he can, even if that means breaking the laws of time. But then the next story, he is this bumbling person. But we get to that when we talk about the end of time. And this, of course, is the insulated for the Time Lord Victorious event. So that is The Waters of Mars. Overall, it's one of the best 10th Doctor stories. It's easily one of my favourites as well. I think it might be my favourite 10th Doctor story. As much as I like stories like Midnight, Blink, actually any story from Series 3, this story, I think, just really talks to the 10th Doctor more. And it has this... Actually, I tell a lie, I think Midnight might be... Midnight in this story, I think, I'm actually even ground on my part. They do very similar things, but also very different things. And this story really utilises the Base Under Siege story very well, which is interesting because only 2 characters are really important to the narrative, with everyone basically being red shirts. But it means so much to the character, and I feel like if the 10th Doctor is your favourite story, this is a must-watch. And it's also a must-watch for the canonicity of Doctor Who, as, again, it plays into the event of Time Lord Victorious. This is what kicked it off, essentially. Basically, 10 years prior to the actual event at hand, just goes to show how powerful this story is, that it can kick off an entire event on its own, just by the fact that the Doctor is slowly becoming this egotistical character who thinks that he won the Time War, that he deserves he deserves something for this. And that just puts the Doctor in a very interesting mindset, which sadly, if you're going by the TV point of view, doesn't actually pay off, which is a real big shame. But luckily, we will get that payoff, hopefully. So that is The Waters of Mars. Great story. So join me next time where the Doctor's ego starts going basically mad as he decides to go up against his greatest threat yet. He decides to destroy the very concept of death itself as he goes after the creatures which basically invented mortality. So join me next time for The Knight, the Fool and the Dead. And I'll see you next time on the Doctor Who Marathon. Ta-da!